Progressing urban development, and we have Brenna, and we have David, and we have Roger, and I'm just going to table already. We have a mover, which is myself, and then Councillor Darby will second this, so we'll put those in. Right, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we've had a few cracks at this in a workshop setting, and I think a paper 6 months or so ago, I'm not going to churn through too much of this material, Mr. Chairman. Probably just helpful, though, to restate the context for what we're talking about, because there is quite a bit in this report. We all know that the big sort of strategy being pursued by the council is to, over time, get more of Auckland's new growth into existing centres and suburbs, particularly concentrated where those are on good transport links, and that a consequence of that will become increasingly apparent will be the need to invest in one way or another in the repurposing of a lot of those centres which were built for a different era, not for a big residential population, and that there will be other amenity issues which arise as old housing stock is replaced much more intensively in suburbs like Mount Roskill on the scale being envisaged by Housing New Zealand. That strategy the council has adopted is based on the logic of, I guess, a couple of things. One is using the infrastructure we've already invested in, and although, you know, the public are critical of everything, there's actually been very big investment in a lot of transport infrastructure, all of which we need to make good use of, as well as the investment in community facilities, even if a number of them are getting tired. And that strategy also reflects the fact that there are lots of people who don't want to live, you know, way out in greenfields areas. They want more choices to live in current suburbs and centres, which is what the unitary plan and the work of agencies such as ourselves addresses. So we all know that this area of activity is hard. Going into current centres and suburbs, no matter how carefully you tackle it, is challenging because you're changing things, and often a lot of people, understandably from their point of view, don't want that change. And so this is difficult, and this report really has come from and pulls together the need for additional tools and re-emphasising current ones to help support that key strategy of the council, which probably, when you think about it, is one of the most important underlying strategies that you have, and the impacts that it has. Supporting that growth strategy and the way the council's decided to do that is one of the biggest sort of games in town. None of this is a silver bullet of itself, but all the contents of this report represents practical levers that are going to be available to us and other players where relevant to help meet this challenge of giving residents more choice, realistic choice, to live in suburbs and centres that are a bit closer in, rather than there only being the greenfields option to the extent that's applied in the past. So I think, Mr. Chairman, with that introduction, it's probably most efficient just to go straight to questions, because we've had presentations and workshops.
All right, well, councillors, as David's introduced, we've had a good number of workshops and presentations on this, and this is a culmination, and this is a really important component of our LTP, overall LTP package, and is obviously complementary and to the One Local Board initiatives, where there's a fair amount of meshing together. So in that case, the One Local Board initiatives in some areas, effectively, or we should say some areas which are not in the transform and unlock categories of the Panuku Work Programme, are getting something delivered through the One Local Board initiative. So obviously we're trying to do as much as we can within limited resources we have. So, Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks. Just two quick questions, Mr Chairman. That's to do with the repayment protocols, David, the 4 and 6 years in specific terms, a little bit more detail on that, and also around the PDA board delegations for 20 million. The reason why.
Yeah, so the time frames is just reflecting, up until now under legacy rules, there was only one time period available for repaying the fund, and didn't take account of the lead time and the implementation time to get money out of sites where there's bigger, much more complex things going on. So this is really trying to recognise that all these areas, locations are not the same, and we need a bit more flexibility to address that. The delegations is more or less done on simply updating land prices for when they were originally set. So I think in real terms, we've done a calculation. These effectively take us back to about 2011 or 12 values when the current delegations were set.
Right. Thank you. It's very clear.
Member Taku.
Kia ora, Mr Chairman. Tēnā kōrua, David Me Roger. Just my question relates to recommendation F. I guess my question is, if you utilise that and that goes through, does that give you the scope to bypass engagement with Māori over these properties?
Yes, it would give us that scope. Whether we did that in practice will depend on the circumstances, but just to remind everyone how we've got this category of properties. So these are properties we've used, we have bought out of the Strategic Development Fund specifically for a development purpose, often to add to another site that we're selling with it or as part of it. And so it seems, the reason for this recommendation is that them seems a bit perverse that we've gone out and bought a site for the specific purpose of development, and then we have to put it through the normal full process to sell it, when in fact we have to sell it to repay the fund. So you're correct that it enables us to bypass, I guess, all of the normal consultation processes, local boards and everything, because in reality site's been bought for a particular purpose and has to be sold.
So you didn't say for, you said, I think you said certain circumstances or something?
Well, the reason I think it's not black and white is because, so we decide to sell it, we take the site to the market. Under our normal rules, mana whenua then get early notice of the fact there's a development opportunity, and in most situations, unless this has been incorporated into something that logically is part of a bigger development that's already been undertaken by another partner. So there will still be lots of, there aren't a lot of these sites anyway, but there will still be plenty of opportunities for mana whenua to have an opportunity for a development. So to give you a practical example, there is a very good site on the corner of Dominion and Valley Road that we inherited. We bought the neighbouring site and added it to it and incorporated it from the Strategic Development Fund. That's currently getting a consent. It's going to be multi-level. There'll be over 100 apartments. We don't want to have to go through the full consultation process for the piece of land that we bought, but that whole site will go under our protocols to all mana whenua as an early notice of a development opportunity.
Kia ora, Mr Chairman, I'm just going to, did you say it had been moved and seconded? I'm just going to seek that recommendation F be put separately and by division. Thank you.
Councillor Casey.
David, just to address the elephant in the room, which is the local boards who are not involved in the transform and lock areas. Looking at your report, you say, and I quote, the issue of surplus asset sales will be difficult for them, but that some local board members have requested Panuku to include their town centres in the programme to bring about positive change. Would that include Puki, Tāpapa and Albert Eden? And if not, what boards are we talking about? And how are you doing that, really?
Yeah, well, I don't specifically recall whether Puketapapa and Albert Eden have asked to add centres, but I mean, you've heard this morning from Manarewa and Papakura, we've had Glen Eden, Silverdale, at least another couple I can't remember off the top of my head. So,
Whangaparaoa?
Pardon?
Whangaparaoa?
Well, Silverdale, yes. I think, yeah. So, the reality, and I think we talked about that at the workshop, the inevitable consequence of any prioritisation process in any part of council activity, whether it's stormwater, transport, community facilities, you're really saying that for the period of time ahead, for the budget you've got, these areas are going to be done and others will have to wait. And really, that's effectively what's being said here. And this is a bit of a new debate for the council because Panuku hasn't been here for previous LTPs, but prioritising how we invest money in urban redevelopment of our centres will be an ongoing part of LTPs, and will be the same prioritisation reality that affects every other function that you deal with.
I think I was more asking, I understand that reinvestment of asset sales isn't proposed, but you have got 3 bullet points of what is
yes, yeah, well,
proposed. Sorry,
yes.
that's what I
No,
was
that's
asking
a good
for.
point,
How are
Councillor.
you going to help
Yes,
those boards
yes.
that are not in the
Yeah.
priority areas?
So the tools that are available for those boards will be having candidates for support sites, optimisation, and targeted rates. So if I take each of those in turn, and to some extent this will climb into the debate you had with Manarewa. So it's important to understand that support sites is an area that we're prepared to be very flexible about, because in a way they're self-selecting, because a support site is a site that is capable of a viable development proposition. So it doesn't actually have a budget cost to it, it produces revenue. The advantage for the local board is that we're there working with them to control and guide the development outcome and the timelines, and to make sure that things like the design is sensitive to local plans and the centre. So we can, we're open to, and this might be what happens in Manarewa, we are open to expanding those as they stack up for those very reasons, because we will simply resource to undertake those developments because they actually produce revenue. And to go back to the slide that I put up at the, whoops, I thought there was a pointer. The left-hand box there, if you remember that, where we talk commercial strategy, that's what we're doing in all of our centres, irrespective: support, unlock and transform. And the essence of the box on the left is that we're getting a superior outcome using a market viable site, which has a benefit as well as producing money, has a benefit to that centre. The key thing that support doesn't have is the 2 boxes, the middle one and the right-hand one, which is the reinvestment in the centre beyond the commercial outcome. So that's still a useful thing to offer, Councillor, to local boards that have got a particularly significant site in or near a centre that they don't just want to sell and whatever happens, happens. Optimisation is something that's covered in this report. It was actually a policy adopted by the Council, I think, in 2014. We have been trying reasonably hard, and with increasing focus now, on getting some more of those off the ground, because they enable a board to get, again, if it's a development viable site, say the sale of airspace, it enables communities to get facilities replaced or improved, because you're allowed to reinvest the money from a service side, as Mr. Walker outlined before. So that's a real benefit, and I think once boards get a bit more comfortable making those sorts of decisions, there's a lot of potential there. The third thing is the targeted rate opportunity, which is again outlined in this report, with the significant new innovative tweak in it around treatment of current owner-occupiers. That also is something which you can see over time offers a self-help tool to local boards looking for a package of investment in their centres.
The optimisation, could you use a couple of examples? I think there was one in Avondale that was approved, but does that also include the Iraqi Community Board facility? Where
Yeah,
can be
I think I'm not sure how much we've made public, but there is an example, and there is an example in a suburb where we have, and this is typical. It's a well-located site.
Main road. Main road. Transport route.
It's on a good transport route. What's currently there is an old, fairly grotty, single-level community centre, and the proposition that we've been working on and are still hopeful of landing is to essentially demolish the current structure, rebuild a new centre of about the same size but with a modern design, and have probably 3 levels or so of apartments above it. So that's a concrete example that we're confident we will land.
Increase community footprint, but
we can't name where it is, so it may start with O, but
Yeah.
The ward itself.
And there are actually 5 that we've been working on hard to try and nail this year. Your one in Avondale, the park, was one of them.
All right, we have Councillor Newman.
Just to clarify and to, so people are absolutely aware of the implications. So the areas that are not currently prioritised, whilst the message might be, well, you're not prioritised at this time, but in the future you can be prioritised. Notwithstanding that, for those areas that are not prioritised, that the option of divestment of non-strategic assets continues in those locations, with the intention of the policy for those areas that are not prioritised for the capital from proceeds of sale being allocated for the regional budget. Is that correct?
Yeah, look, I think that's the purpose of the review, the comprehensive review after the 3 years. So you'll have seen what this paper outlines, and this is an idea that's evolved along with the discussions and the workshops. Is years 4 to 10, there's an amount of money from the proceeds that are being held for urban development, and there will be this thorough review of where we are in 3 years, how we continue to roll out a credible program of urban redevelopment in our centres, going forward. And inevitably, if you look at the debate this time, it'll be some combination of how we use asset sales proceeds, it'll be targeted rates, it'll be general LTP funding. That's all on the table for 3 years' time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Member Hanadi.
Yeah, not yet, that's in a couple of years.
Oh, we have a signal.
Just to
Your worship.
ask another... Yeah, right.
Councillor.
Ask another question on that topic that my colleague, Member Taipari, asked. If you had the recommendation already, if you had that power to bypass, or do you have the power to bypass already?
When we say the power to bypass, what we're asking is to streamline the process. That if we bought a development, the only way you can use the Strategic Development Fund if it's to buy a development site, which might be standalone or it might be something you incorporate in something else. And we've got to repay the money, and what we're saying is it's foolish to do the whole bloody loop around local boards and the whole chamois to consult people about whether we should sell it, because we've got to sell it. And often it's been incorporated into something which is the purpose of buying it. Which doesn't mean iwi will never have an opportunity, or in fact have lots of opportunities for those development sites, but the point of this resolution is to make sure we don't get caught unintentionally in process requirements that aren't practical.
but it allows you to bypass to be able to reach your goal.
Yes. If the logic is the case. I mean, if we buy a site and incorporate it into something else, it can start to get very complicated. But broadly, you know, we are committed where we have development sites, unless there's some exception. Mana Whenua were given 2 months early notice of the fact it's coming onto a market to register their interest. And we are, as you know, making a real effort to progress commercial development opportunities with Mana Whenua and have some live ones now.
Right, well, there are no further questions. We'll put up the amendment and discuss the amendment first and vote on that. And then...
Sorry, I had my hand up for questions.
Sorry, Councillor Cooper. Yeah. Sorry, we didn't see you, Councillor Cooper. And Councillor Darby, is that right? Yep.
It's really around the issue I brought up earlier from the local board presentation around reviewing, because I'm imagining that this amendment, I haven't seen it, as around adding on another extension to the boundary. I guess for me, I really want to have from you, is it going to interfere with what we've already done? We've already got priorities, and I imagine we'll have a plan, or I don't know if we've got a plan for the next review of this, because I'm really reluctant to add bits here and there unless we actually look at how far we've got already, because for a lot of it, we're really, we've set this in 2014 and we're, chugging along, but we haven't had huge results yet because of the lead lag times, understandably so. I guess I want to know, is it better to wait? What's the effect going to be, and to do a proper review rather than just be adding on bits and pieces as we go.
Councillor Cooper, can I just take Councillor Darby first?
Sure.
And then I'll put the amendment up, and then your question,
okay, thanks.
now already asked, is first off the rank.
Thanks.
So Councillor Darby.
For this work, David. David and Roger, Brenda, can you just tell me, you've been thinking about other potentials. Clearly that's been across your mind because you're getting approaches from the north, the west, south, east, etc. How much time would you require? Would sort of 1 August give you enough time to bring something to the planning committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, just to put on record the fact that we have a lot of sympathy for the views expressed by the Manarewa board and Councillor Newman. There's no doubt that Manarewa is a centre that over time should take a lot more housing, and it's on a transport route. We're in the position we are with the locations we've got because you can't pretend to do everything everywhere, and the list we got was a result of a lot of compromise and negotiation and what have you in 2015 that heavily involved the council. So we are trying to stay focused on those areas, and as a result of what Councillor Cooper called lead time, we've done a lot of community engagement and planning. We've got sites out to the market, and we're at the point now where implementation is going to accelerate considerably, and clearly we're not looking to sort of expand the order book too much. The second key point is around resources. So the key impact, as you know, of assuming this paper is passed, of adding more unlocks is that there's a limited pool of money gets spread further. So that's just an inevitable reality. So coming to the question of when's the appropriate time to look at this, I think 1 August would be a good suggestion, Mr. Chairman, for a broader look, because apart from the requests we get, there's joint work going on now between the council, family and the Crown over the Auckland plan and the growth areas, which is going to percolate its way through the system. We know there's almost certainly going to be impacts and questions back for us around the government's housing program when that gets more shape. We know that things like I'm going to say fast track, but a speeding up of the light rail project, and the ambition of the Minister to have development areas and targeted rates of that will put a lot of these issues into contention and might have consequences for our work in some way. So I think a suggestion of 1 August would be a good one, because we wouldn't want to hold up this paper today. We've already been it's a fairly long marathon as it is. But certainly coming back in 1 August with a review of areas in the light of all those other factors I mentioned would be a sensible thing. And obviously Manarewa can be covered in that.
And then also the Minister of Housing's signalling of the 12 to 14 urban development areas. Again,
Correct.
that's could be a huge impact and could bring something totally out of left field, would be
Correct.
fair enough to say. Okay. Yes. Right, so there's no more speakers generally, so we're going to put up the amendment. Oh, sorry, Councillor Darby, you have further questions?
So I haven't seen the amendment, but I've given you, and we've talked about this, about some further work to be done on the Transform Unlock support program and potential additions to it to come back to a planning committee workshop by 1 August, because it is the remit of the planning committee. This, in greatest respect, Mr. Chair, it's actually, that program is not the finance committee's, because this is a financial issue before us today. But I haven't seen the other motion, and
okay, so
take that one first.
Here is the first amendment that we've put up, and then there is a second amendment put up by Councillor Darby, and I'll second it if there is no other seconder, but I'm happy to second that. So this is the first one, but look, just to perhaps help inform the first one, can we put up that second amendment as well? And we won't only be focusing on H, but I think it's important we have the reflection of I to inform the overall debate on the amendments. Okay. Can we put both together, please? So if we could just pause here, because I think it's important, and then Councillor Cooper is first.
Well, am I speaking to my amendment?
Oh, sorry, do you want to speak first, Councillor Newman? Yes?
I think that would be appropriate, Chair.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, so you go ahead, please.
Ready? Look, Chair, this is a fraught issue, and what's going to happen here, if there isn't some sort of recognition of the equity argument spatially across this region, then you can pass whatever policy you want. But what's going to happen is that unless there is an intention to reach for a broader community consensus, the proposals for sales and divestment are going to come back here, and it will literally be trench warfare, one sale at a time. And I've seen that. In the time that I've been here, we've had debates around Anzac Street, the Howick car park, that came up, I remember that. There have been some very difficult debates that have taken place, and the outcomes have been somewhat unpredictable, Chair. What Angela Dalton came and talked about today was the work that is taking place, frankly, despite the direction of the governing body previously. That work has been sponsored by that local board with that town centre steering group, a commercial focus. That is an area that is in an integrated area plan. There is a spatial priority for the Manurewa, Takanini, Papakura corridor, completely unfunded in this 10-year plan. It's a plan without an implementation because that's unfunded. These are town centres that are in the Southern Initiative area. Scope for transformation. I'm not quite sure how you can transform those locations without some sort of public investment. These are areas that are adjacent to the rail corridor, completely consistent with the regional policy strategy, the RPS provisions of the Auckland Plan. The objectives and policy are to get intensification around those corridors to complement mass public transit. Chair, I am asking, and look, I mean, I'm actually uncomfortable even about H because I haven't included Papakura, but to get something happening there, there is an opportunity to move ahead with a program of reprioritisation in the Manurewa Town Centre around investment rather than just sitting on those assets. But at the moment, without some sort of clarity, there's potential for those assets to be sold and for the capital, instead of being recycled, is just reallocated to the regional pot. Now, I congratulate those councillors who have been successful in getting their areas, their town centres, into either Transform or Unlock previously. I wasn't here when that debate took place previously, but I have seen the work that Lee Orton and Angela Dalton are leading, and I think that's very reasonable that we could try and support that. I'm not asking for a reallocation at this time. I'm simply asking for the advice on the option of extending the Transform Manukau to include those 2 town centres, that are already benefiting from the local board's reallocation of the capital budget to support public transport, which is consistent with the RPS provisions. I'm simply asking for that advice in relation to Manurewa. I'll say this is not anticipating funding from the divestment of assets within the existing Transform Manukau footprint to be reallocated to Manurewa and Te Mahia. Manurewa has existing assets that could potentially be divested with the capital recycled for Manurewa. We certainly wouldn't want to see Transform Manukau impeded in any way. So I've asked for some advice on this. I don't think it's an unreasonable request, and I will be. I welcome the debate, but I'd like a division on this because I want to see how councillors feel about this.
Just to clarify one thing that you did say, Councillor Newman, which was you were congratulating the individual councillors who'd managed to lobbying successfully get areas of Unlockins transform into the program. Let us be quite clear, the work that came through and the suggestion and the work that Panuku has built on, and indeed they built on it with the report they came back with in 2015 with this work program, was based on staff work done on the spatial priorities that was done under the auspices of the then Deputy Mayor and Chair of that relevant committee, which I can't remember what it was called, but that was a staff issue and it was fairly objective, well it was totally objective, evidence-based, and it was not caused and achieved by lobbying. So just make that quite clear. So Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Councillor Clow, for clarifying that, because that's rather a nasty insinuation, especially when Councillor Newman wasn't here, as he said. And there was a lot of disappointment for everybody, and you know, we've all got more than one town centre quite often, and you know, we'd like them all done, of course. So you know, the fact that we had a matrix and it was informed by measurement against different parameters, not who was the best at lobbying. For me, look, yes, local boards have the job of placemaking, absolutely, that is their job, and they have a budget that they have, and they prioritise the use of that budget. Everybody has, and they all have local board plans as well, and we all respect those, and they're there. But we know that every local board plan will have elements that needs more funding. That is how it works. But if we around this table all just side with our own local board every time, and then we get a group of people to do that, we become so parochial, we may as well have 21 local borough councils. Our job around here, even if we have disappointment from time to time, is to actually, you know, follow a regional strategy so we can get these things done and have a timeline, and we actually work through it. And some you'll win some and you lose some. But for me, this is around, if we start adding ad hoc, we're going to really not get where we need to get. And that's my concern. Look, I haven't got a problem with looking at it, but I think that along with Councillor Darby's amendment, that yes, absolutely look at that extension of the Manukau transform, the inclusion of Manurewa and the train station into that as part of this work that we're looking at, that Councillor Darby's is proposing, because we probably do, after 4 to 5 years, need a review of this. But I'd really like to see some of the work that's been worked on for the last few years actually happen before we leap to the next thing. So for me, I can't support, I suppose I can support us looking at it, but I'd really like to see if the mover and the proposer would look and say, actually, well, let's have it as part of the work of a review, because it makes more sense, because other local boards will be keen to have their areas part of the review, and it seems a bit odd to just look at one area. Let's look at what the next cabs are off the rank and bring it back as a decent piece of work, so we can look right across the region, what are the next transform and unlock areas. So I guess that's my plea. It's not against a particular area. It's just saying let's do this in a sensible, formulaic fashion rather than just adding bits here and there to a current program.
Thank you, Councillor Cougar, and I'm aware that you may ask the questions before and some of the answers have been provided.
Well,
so
I did
I'm allowing a blending of
We'll
questions
be here all
within
day, Mr.
comment
Chair.
on this particular
I'll
amendment.
have to
So,
leave early.
Councillor Holst,
Great Chairman, Shataji.
Councillor Holst.
Thank you, and much of this has been said by my fellow colleague from the West. I just wanted to bring it back to what my understanding of the recommendations is actually about. This is the process by which we subtly change our expectations of Panuku that these funds can be ring-fenced and reinvested into these locations. That's what this is about. So I'm going to be supporting the amendment from Councillor Darby and yourself to say let's take quite rightly any additions to the Planning Committee, but I'm not going to be supporting Councillor Newman's recommendation because this is not the place for that discussion. This is a discussion about how we deal with that funding in a way that refocuses the work into our list of areas that we want to work through with Panuku. I think we're conflating two debates into one. So nothing to add, Mr. Chair, except to say why I'll be voting the way that I will. And this report is excellent. It's long overdue, and I'm very glad we're moving in this direction. Thank you.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I seconded H because I didn't. Sorry, there's another H. I say, but I seconded the first H because I didn't see the second H. And I tell you, I seconded the first H because all it was asking is for Panuku to provide advice around this particular option. All right. So we had a presentation from the local board. We could have listened and done nothing, and this was just actually asking the agency that's responsible for what we're doing here to give some advice. I didn't see anything wrong with that. Now I've read the second H. I don't see anything wrong with that either, and I don't see why you can't vote for both, because in essence the first H would probably be included in the second H. By nature, although it's not stipulated. So all I get from both H's is that we're saying that potentially this was done some time ago. Let's have a relook, a to it. Just, are we still on the right track? And if we're not, potentially, would there be any changes? And if so, where they would be? So I'm happy to support both of them. If one was an H and one was an I, it's actually not committing anybody to anything. It's just saying have a quick look, see if we're still on the right track. We've got a local board that's particularly brought up a particular situation that may or may not work. I haven't got the answer to that. I'm not supposed to have the answer to that. But then for all the other areas, and Councillor Cooper mentioned some other areas, look, that comes into a wider pot. Actually, it's not that hard. You could. There's nothing wrong with supporting both.
Well, yes. Well, the bottom line is the first H could be incorporated into the second H, but the second H can't be incorporated into the first H. They're quite different beasts.
Yes, but the first
Would be
H,
really, I
so
would
with
ask,
respect,
and the reason why the issue that some of us, certainly me as chair, have with the first H is the specificity of it, which is going basically from outside, not even a support function, and zooming up, and I used the analogy of Kiwi in the Melbourne Cup, zooming up to win the bloody race at Transform.
well, but they might come back and say no.
Well, they
So-
might, but it's very specific,
it's
whereas
been a request.
H will cover
Point of
that.
order.
They will come back, so...
Chair, the point of order, and I think it's clarification as well as a point of order, is this: is the Finance and Performance Committee, is the Finance and Performance Committee the committee that these reports should be dealt with?
That's why the second H is quite specific
And
about the
this is
planning
why
committee.
the point of order was the clarification that this is not the committee where it should be going. Therefore, then, I think, Chair, we either continue on with H moved by Newman and Simpson, which I do not support, but however do support the Darby and Clough amendment because it's going to the correct committee.
Thank you, and I agree with you on your point of order. Mayor Goff, Councillor Hills and Councillor Filipaina, but perhaps you've spoken.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr Chairman. I want to speak in support of the motion moved by Councillor Chris Darby, and that's of no disrespect to the presentation that we received from Angela Dalton and Lee Orton. I grew up in both of those areas. I know the shopping centres really well, and I know the need. But if I look up at Councillor Newman's resolution, it talks simply about Manurewa and Te Mahia. And actually, when I had a discussion with Lee outside, he said actually the need in Papakura is even more pressing. It's a more depressed community. It's under greater threat. We really need to act in that area. And if I go out to your area, I could look at Glen Eden and I could say Glen Eden is a town centre that's crying out for redevelopment. It's ages passed it by, it's connected, it's right, literally right on the railway line. And we could go around and do it in an ad hoc way, or we could do it and we could do it by saying, well, you know, if you raise this, we'll have a special study for Glen Eden, and we'll have a special study for this and a special study for that. But that's not the way to do this. It has to be done on a principle-based approach, not a lobbying-based approach. It needs to be driven by principle, otherwise it'll just be the squeaky wheel, and that's no way to solve a problem. And it can't be based on making ad hoc changes. We'll add this one, we'll add 1.5 of that one. It just doesn't work like that. Mr Chairman, I think David Rankin made the important point that we've got a set sum of money that we're voting here, and we can stretch it out. We could add another 10 centres in, and each one of them has a case to put for it. But all you're doing is spreading the money more thinly. I think you have to have a process of prioritisation. And if you're having a process of prioritisation, it's not based on the loudest voice, it's based on what best meets the principles that underlie the decision to support a transform, an unlock or a support. So H allows us to go back and have a look at that again and hear from our officers, and it allows us to make a decision that is based on the principles, not on an ad hoc approach. So I'm going to support H, and I'd strongly urge members that that is the logical, the sensible and the fairest way of doing this. Otherwise we'll run into all sorts of problems.
One assumes that's H2. So
H2.
Yeah. So we have Councillor Hills, Councillor Filipaina and Councillor Watson. And Councillor Collins, did you want to be added to?
Sorry, Chair, it was probably...
Yes.
Yeah, so I think Alf's point sort of covered it, but just a quick point. Obviously asking for advice is fine, but we'd obviously need money for research or a plan. Like how deep would your advice go if this passed today, and what would you need extra budget to?
No.
Okay.
Wonderful. Councillor Filipaina.
Chair, just again, it's more around clarification, and so we'll be dealing with both of the amendments. I just want to get that, because once
at
we
this
end
stage, the first one is still on the table, and we will deal with that first.
And then, depending on what happens with that, we then go shoot to yours and
yes.
son.
Yes.
Okay, and then, okay, thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I think we're making the proverbial mountain out of a molehill here. From listening to Panuku, it was pretty clear that they can do the work. It's no great imposition. The words used are pretty mild. Request advice on the option. That's not too strenuous, one would have thought. It's not taxing any budgets or not committing to any course of action. It's just providing advice. Like some of the other speakers have said, I can't really see too much difference between either of the H's and this rather unusual 2 H's and 2 amendments at the one time. I wouldn't have thought that was perhaps the most straightforward way to proceed, certainly in terms of standing orders, but leave that aside. I can see what the Chair's trying to do. I have absolutely no difficulty supporting both of them. And in fact, I think there's a degree of sense. The only difference is as a consequence of the appearance of the local board here, we're being specific in one of the requests. And I would say, Mr. Chair, if we look at some of the advice given to us in respect of the local board's view of disposals generally under point 78, there are some storm clouds massing on the horizon, if not here already, in terms of the perceptions of, I think, probably nearly all the local boards outside the favoured few who do appear to be in the program as it stands. And I quote, these local boards consider that the areas are unfairly carrying the weight of the asset sales target, and that these areas will be disadvantaged in the future. The program is considered unfair and short-sighted, and doesn't take account of the specifics. Now, I'm not blaming Panuku for that, but clearly that's the sentiment that they're encountering on a pretty regular basis now, which we know all too well from in this chamber. So I would say, Mr. Chair, that we should support H and maybe I instead of two H's. That might be a more appropriate way to proceed.
Just remind, just ask David, could you just expand a little bit on the optimisation, which you said is something we haven't really done much of? Just to explain more fully what it means. All those boards that are not in the transform or unlock areas.
So optimisation has a couple of possibilities to it. The first is taking an underutilised site and just selling it and putting the money into upgrading another community facility in that area. So typically, well, let's take the one that happened in Faux, where an underutilised park, which happened to have a house on a big part of it, was sold, and the money was put into other projects the local board had that have to meet a certain criteria. The second context is the one I gave, the example of the rebuild of a community, a single level community facility, where you're using the other development possibilities on a site to fund replacement or improvement of a community facility. So we've got examples of both of those two that we're working on, and they have relevance to one degree or another probably in every local board area, because in actual fact we have a lot of underutilised properties on the council balance sheet.
And sorry, just to reiterate, David, you said that you're aware that that is a program of work that you need to be improving on. And
yeah, I mean, basically what happened, Mr. Chairman, was it was adopted, it was passed in 2014. We soon after had the transition of the two legacy organisations to Panuku. We then had a big program of work with the priority development locations. So from a resource perspective, we lost some momentum in this, which we've recently started to pick up again. There are also some challenges for council departments being able to respond to the piece of work, and that's outlined in the report, and we're hoping to get some improvement in that as well.
Okay, so councillors, there's no more speakers, but I just...
Sorry, I've had my hand up.
Okay, sorry, I can't look everywhere, Councillor Fletcher, but I've got staff here who will pick you up, and they did. Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm probably one of those that see the opportunity of having an H and an I. That's, sorry, it's just very noisy. I was here when we actually had the discussion in an earlier term of council about this, and I would wholeheartedly agree that this shouldn't be about lobbying, but I would draw to those who were here in the last term to say that the issue of particularly Papakura was hotly discussed. it was ambiguous in terms of the information that was available at the time, and I think if you go back and actually look at the vote, there was a division on this because we felt that there was insufficient, those of us who were trying to bring some clarity around the South and the opportunities that needed to take place in terms of that aspiration. So I to a degree, applaud the local board for coming today. And if you look at Clause 84, I read it in terms of the fact that in our own report, we're saying local boards are encouraged to bring forward service property optimisation opportunities. Panuku will provide appropriate support to those local boards to enable them to utilise and so forth. So I don't see it as necessarily inconsistent, but I do agree with those that a lot of the detailed decisions are those of the planning committee. And so the I that you have foreshadowed, or the H as you have foreshadowed it, I suppose to be technically correct, is the appropriate place in the planning committee for further discussion on this. But to get advice from Panuku would not seem to be inconsistent with then that being referred on to the planning committee. So I will support both H, and I hope H then becomes I. But I would refer you back to the minutes of those meetings that the decisions around Panuku were taken at that time. I realise that it's a very, very difficult delivery for Panuku. We have got aspirations right across the region. I understand the issue of prioritisation, but I would just like it to go back in the context of, if we are referring to the decisions that were taken in that last term of council, let's go back and revisit the minutes and the discussions and the reports that were available at that time. Whether or not, wherever you might sit on this, I do think that there are some particular issues for the South that are going to need to be addressed, and the planning committee is the right place for that to take place. But local boards have been encouraged to come forward. We've heard from Angela Dalton today. I would like to feel that we can support her, but make sure that that work is sent to the planning committee as that is the most appropriate place.
Can I raise a point of order, Chair? Can I request, with respect to my amendment, that that advice is reported to the planning committee? So just at the conclusion of the after the weather station.
No problem. I will allow that. I presume
hang on. Provide advice to the planning committee on the.
That's fine.
And just delete the two at the end.
Councillor Fletcher, have you finished?
Well, I'm very pleased that Councillor Newman has actually included that, because I think it now satisfactorily covers both of the points of both of the amendments. So thank you.
Okay, we have Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if H goes ahead, does that mean that other local boards can come through now and ask for, because I have Mount Wellington in my area.
Yeah,
so
that's the whole point with this.
A little bit of a Pandora's box, but yes, certainly.
That's what they're saying.
Why not?
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool by going forward and doing this as planning committee.
Councillor Darby.
Look, I'm just trying to broker a way through this. There's two motions. Can we put both of them up? Thank you.
I was actually being, okay.
Yeah.
We're
So
going to
look,
make
I'm
it
just
I
wondering
was being
if
sensitive there.
I'd like to just resolve this. It seems that we've missed the real body of the report, which is some great work. And this is important, and I can understand Councillor Newman's urge here. I'm wondering if it's the words could be that it's the second H, and then after the comma, after the word program, including consideration of Manurewa Takanini Papakura, because remember the chair referred to the IAP, not part of the IAP, the whole IAP. But that does not preclude any other centre. It doesn't give any weight to that outcome, because we have to think about this from a regional perspective. So I'm just wondering if there's a willingness of the mover of the first and the seconder of the first to do it that way, including consideration of Manurewa Takanini and Papakura, comma again after Papakura, and then that the total work be brought to the Planning Committee workshop 1 August. I'm just trying to make us all win here.
Councillor Newman and Councillor Simpson.
The issue here is that that really Manurewa shouldn't be an unlock. It should be a transform, and so I suppose you could put that advice that consideration could be incorporated within this, but I'm not actually requesting that its consideration as part of a new unlock program. I'm requesting that it be considered as part of an extension of existing transform. It is a specific issue. I expect that my amendment's going to be lost, and this may well be incorporated as part of the consideration in new I. But I I can't actually speak in response to
Okay, so we back all that out. The answer is no. So we back all that out. That was just added.
Can we just? I'm still willing to keep that there if it's okay with your second, because it does include it, but it doesn't prescribe it into a transform category.
Actually stronger, Daniel, what he's put up than what you've put up.
Yes, I know. I just wish it could come back sooner rather than the 1st of August.
Okay, so I'm asking one more time to the mover and the seconder of
I'm happy
H.
to, if Councillor Darby and if the second is comfortable with that wording, I'm happy to withdraw my amendment on that basis.
With a big sigh, I will agree as the seconder. That's fine. So we remove H.
Feel free to come back earlier than the 1st of August.
We remove H.
Do you want to move the other?
We are now going to take I, and we're not going to have any debate on it or any questioning on I. So H is gone, withdrawn. I'm going to put I. All those in favour? Aye.
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 Against?
This doesn't have to be
against.
H now.
Right, so I is now incorporated.
There is no
I is
H
Actually,
on the council
H,
system
not I.
already.
It's H.
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
I becomes H. H is in. Right?
David.
Right. Member Tapu.
Kia ora, Mr. Chairman, now that that's over. I come back to where I was in the question time around recommendation F. And I did ask you when we come to time for deliberation that we put it separate and was in seek by division. Before I get to that stage, I would like to try to find a solution, if I can, by propping up an amendment that says on the end of F, and where appropriate, consultation be undertaken with mana whenua where any Māori cultural interests may be affected. Now, I got the story that it was about commercial, that was fine, there was opportunity there, but my issue is about properties that are purchased and disposed of that may have cultural interests that have no discussion with mana whenua. I understood there was discretion around opportunity to speak with mana whenua. Mr. Rankin said that. I think particularly referring to commercial interests. But my issue is around the cultural interest. And again, it's about having the conversation. It's about this council and its CCOs being responsive to Māori. It's about including Māori as part of making this a greater place. So I put that up, Mr. Chairman, as a mover, and to an amendment to F. And my colleague, I understand, is going to support me.
I'm happy if you're in agreement that we just add it on rather than making an amendment.
No, I'd rather just add it on to the thing.
I'm
but
happy with
I
that.
am
Is the
amending
seconder happy with that?
recommendation.
Okay, so we just need to get the exact words, David.
Can I
Okay, so while that is going up, and the mover and seconder have okayed that, and it will be shown, Councillor Simpson, do you
Sorry,
want
I was
to
just
speak?
asking Panuku what they thought about that.
I got a wink and a nod and a
Wink
smile.
and a nod? Well,
Yep.
that's good enough for you?
Triple
Okay.
explanation there.
Smile.
What's a wink and a nod?
Wink and a nod. Well, David and I have got a thing going.
Yeah, that's
eh?
perfect.
Have
It's a
done for
Rankin
years.
special.
Okay, moving on.
This new liberal age.
So you're going, just a clarification, you're going to include that as part of the
Yep,
substantial?
it's
Thank you,
been
thank you,
typed
thank
in
you,
now.
Thank you.
So, I think everyone's quite exhausted by the discussion on the amendments. So I'm just going
Dates that killed us, not
I'm
you.
just going to speak briefly and just say that because I'm said it before. I'm really feel strongly about the Panuku work program, just as I feel strongly about the One Local Board initiatives that we hopefully will implement and incorporate into our LTP. But I'll just say one thing that it would be great if we're unanimous on this, is because we need to be aware of what the new government and the new Minister of Housing is saying about the urban development authorities. They are going to have power over us. They will be going into areas and they will have power over Panuku, power over Auckland Council, our planning, our placemaking, our whole lot. They don't intend to use it because they'd love to do it in cooperation with us. But if we muck around, and I'm not going to open a sore like Takapuna Car Park, but if we muck around too much on things, they will move and they will just bowl over us. And I think that's a really important thing for all of us, including the new centres that aren't in the unlock and transform or support category, is that we want to have a big say in the placemaking that happens in those centres, whether it be Panuku, or whether it be community and parks, or whether it be, you know, Ludo Campbell Ross's section, etc., and the community itself and the local board. I mean, the community stakeholders. So it's important we are hopefully unanimous about this program. So I have Councillor Hills, perhaps, is the only one who wants to speak.
Yes, no, it was just a quick comment, and I, have to go to Panuku. Often they get a lot of criticism for the program or decisions made, but I just wanted to make the point that, look, I've looked through a couple times the decisions made in the past under the Development Committee, and every time the programs came up, they were made unanimously by the councillors, as far as I can find. So Panuku were asked unanimously by councillors for the program, the spatial priorities, the urban location analysis results, everything. And so they've gone ahead and done that work for whether it was this council or the last term. But I just want to say the whole point of this is housing across Auckland, the whole of Auckland, and trying to fit different types of housing there. And, there is going to be ups and downs and difficulties, but it's extremely important we get in behind this and get housing, good design, good development, and Panuku are doing an outstanding job in the communities, whether people are saying it or not. There's huge number of times they talk with the local boards and the communities as much as they can, as well as us. But I just wanted to point out that this work was asked for unanimously throughout 2015 and then again in 2016. So thank you.
Councillor Darby.
And just briefly, I just want to dwell on one area. There's the use of the word optimisation there, and we've been a little bit distracted about the word disposal, and maximisation of the financial return to council. That is not actually the remit, and I'm here often a criticism go Panuku's way and our way. That's what we're about. We're just about yield, dollar yield. And the yield that is being referred to in optimisation goes well beyond that. And it does include an element of that, but then there's a discount value to that when you optimise the community outcomes, you optimise the great design outcomes, and you optimise that sense of place that you want people to have a strong sense of ownership of, because that creates really valuable property. And that's what we're about. We are not going to these transform, unlock, or let alone a support area and just maximising commercial yield. This is all about places for people. Housing people, yes, in apartments, but housing them in great squares and marketplaces, great street environments connected by great transport that's going to sustain not just that community, but all the interconnectedness of the communities to the north, the south, the east and the west into a network of communities that are going to endure a long time. And I'm just delighted that we've all got together, and we've all tested Panuku, we've tested ourselves to get Panuku to the stage, because from today it's implementation time, it's build time. And boy, Auckland wants us to get out of doing so much planning and show it the future that they're going to be living in. And so from today, we will go to build.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. I do want to acknowledge the work that Panuku does, and in particular around bringing Unlock Panmure to the table and the high-level project plan that councillors have approved just a few weeks ago. I looked at point 95 in the agenda in the item, that if council choose not to reinvest the proceeds in the transform and unlock area, that asset sales proceeds could be used to reduce council debt or support investment in other activities. And so, you know, looking at Panmure, looking at the other areas around Auckland, I do see that it is very important for the proceeds of property sales to be reinvested back into the transform and unlock areas. Noting the recommendation about the regional portfolio approach, there are other parts of Auckland, especially in my ward, there's parts in my ward that do not have enough land to sell for their development projects. So I see the benefits in that. And just noting again, you know, for Panmure, the last time there was any major infrastructure investment was in the 1950s with the degraded facilities that we have there. So looking forward to working with Panuku regarding reinvestment if this policy does go through today. So I just wanted to put that out there.
So not everything not everything goes into the pot and just disappears. I mean, as just say with the one local board initiatives, there are investments happening. And for example, Papakura, you know, they've come up. Their one local board initiative was a park and ride, which is their number one project. And Manurewa was the grandstand and development of fields in the area. So we're hoping those will survive the rigour of the LTP. So we have Councillor Newman to round up the debate, and then we will put the A to H without a division on F, presumably. Member Tapiri, thank you.
The nature of the outcome today, it has been difficult to get here. When the matter is reconsidered in August, it will not be because of local boards seeking an ad hoc process. It will be because we have a regional policy statement with plans and objectives. This council's Auckland plan, this council's planning toolkit, which says to intensify to complement mass public transport. It will be because we have previously agreed integrated area plans, spatial priority areas agreed by the governing body. And what these local boards are seeking to do is trying to maximise every opportunity to move their communities forward. So I commend, Chair, your advocacy in support of Panuku for that purpose. But it would be unfair to simply label these local boards as simply indulging in ad hoc patch protection only, because there is a specific planning argument there, and that will be explored, I'm sure, and Chris Darby will fully support that when it comes back to the Planning Committee. What these communities need is the tools to give effect to the very things that we have determined as the policies and the objectives of our planning toolkit, the Unitary Plan, and that somehow we have to fund that, given that there's no funding for the spatial priority areas in the 10-year plan budget. But Chair, I think given your foreshadowing of support for Panuku, that could change, and if that's something that you're going to be advocating, then I look forward to supporting you.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Right, we are going to put A to H to be moved and seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. That is great to have that.
Can we record that as unanimous? Because I think
yes,
that's
I'd like that
important.
recorded as unanimous. Yes. Right, we will have a break till 1:45, and we're going to deal with item 13 before item 12. So just be aware.